Hey everybody! So I have been meaning to put this demo or tips video together for a few days now, and finally got around to doing that. So I'm going to try and share some of the things that I've learned for layered stamping, and hopefully it will help some of you guys who are having trouble with or questions with a bunch of different things. So this could be a very lengthy video, but I'll try and cover the highlights that I know about, okay? So let's first talk stamps. There's a lot of stamps that are out there on the market today that are layering stamps, and so I just kind of went through and pulled a bunch of different examples and particular companies that sell them. The first two examples I have are from Paper Tray Ink. This is a Seasonal Borders Summer Stamp Set. And the nice thing about their stamps is they give you the individual layers, and then they give you the layered up look. So you will have a finished picture idea of what the stamp might look like once all the layers are stamped. And there may be sometimes 3 and 4 different layers of color. This stamp has a lot of different colors, but when I say layers of color, for example, let's isolate on the hibiscus here. This hibiscus in particular, it looks like it's 2 different colors of ink plus the yellow for the stamen. So I have seen, and I'll show you with the Altenew. Altenew is a brand that has sometimes 4 different shades of the same color. So just keep that in mind when you're buying your stamps. You want to look at that, just so that you can keep an eye as to whether you might have the inks that you might want to use. And we'll talk about inks too. So Paper Tray is one of those companies that sells layered stamps. The nice thing about this particular set is they actually included a template here. So here's a template that they sold with the stamp set, because it is a border set and you're repeatedly stamping the same image 3 times to make the border, okay? The other thing you can do is, if you have the dies that match it. Now I happen to have bought the dies separately from the stamp set. If you buy the dies, a lot of times that will help you clue into where the stamp layers are supposed to go. So before they even did this whole thing with the template, I cut out a just a white piece of card with the die, and that helped me to understand where the points are for layering. So that can help if you're having some challenges with layering stamps. There's another example here. This is another hibiscus. So again, this hibiscus is an individual stamp. It looks to me like there's actually the 2 layers for the petals of the plant, and then the center stamen is a different color. So that's what it appears here. But, you know, and I would think that I haven't used this set yet because I just got this from a D-Stash. Here is one from Stampin' Up, and you can see this has got 3 bunnies, okay? This doesn't really give you, this packaging doesn't give you any clues as to how the stamp goes together, okay? So I've used this set a few times now, and it doesn't really give you those clues. So sometimes you have to go on the internet to find out how people are lining up. And you can see here, this is me having played with this stamp set to figure out why I have this really dark spot here, and this dark spot makes it look like he has a hole in his head. Well, that's because this stamp was not lined up when I stamped it. That hole actually isn't supposed to be, or this black spot or brown spot isn't supposed to be right there. It's because it was layered improperly. So when you see your finished image, which this is a very realistic image once it's done and done properly, you'll notice that that little spot is not there. That is something also to recognize as you're stamping. If you're seeing something strange in your finished product, you should maybe look up on Pinterest or Google images of the stamp set, and they'll show you finished cards that will help you line up correctly. So that's just another tip for you to recognize. Now, I had done a card with this set called Sweet Rose Bouquet. And Sweet Rose Bouquet has 4 different layers of the rose to stamp out, which means you should probably use 4 different ink colors. Now, you do not have to do that. I have done it where, not this particular set, I have done layered stamping with 1 to 2 inks. If I didn't have a whole range of inks available to me, or I was just too lazy to figure out what the color combos are, because sometimes you just have to experiment. These are the 4 that I used on this card here. And somebody had asked me when I showed this card, what is this background paper? This is from Paper Tray Ink. It's from one of their printed card sets. It's not stamped. But there are 4 roses in this picture, and they're already together on one stamp set. So each of the 4 roses is not stamped individually. They're stamped together as one color, and then the next layer and the next layer. So these are the different colors that I used. Now, what is this set? This set is actually sold together in a 4-cube set. Altenew has put their sets together, most of them, where it's a gradation of color and you can use it for layering. And that's what gives you the colors here. So you don't want them close in tone. You kind of want the contrast, but you do want them to be the same tone. So that's just something for you to think about when you're picking out the colors for your stamp set. This one had 4 layers, okay? I could have taken the layers and stamped twice with this, let's just say this pink right here, Frosty Pink. I could have stamped it twice with these 2 layers here, and what that does is your second generation is going to come up darker because the spots that are on this stamp right here don't necessarily cover all of these. So you can do this layered stamping without, if you have 4 different layers of the stamp, it doesn't mean you have to have 4 colors, but it's nice to have. It will give you a nice result. If you decide you're going to double stamp with 1 ink to, say, take out one of the 4, you will have this be darker. And you'll just have to see the result. You do have to play with it a little bit to see if that's going to turn out well. So that's just something to recognize. Now, somebody did ask me about inks that I would recommend. Well, obviously you want a dye ink, because layered stamps, really you want the ink to kind of soak into the paper and to kind of do that thing that dye inks do. Well, pigment ink doesn't do that because it sits on top. So I don't recommend you use pigment inks for layered stamping. I actually haven't seen anybody use that. In all the videos that I've watched, I haven't seen anybody use pigment ink. Dye ink is usually the thing they go to. So I do like my Altenew inks. If you do not have this brand, I've used my Paper Tray ink pads before. I've used my Stampin' Up! Ink pads. You just have to find the right contrast of the colors that you may have in your ink pads to make that layering look correct. Okay? So it's not a particular ink that you have to use, but like I said, I use the Altenew ones because they have a 4 palette in each of their cube packs, or they're also selling them as their whole ink pads. I didn't go that way for economic reasons, financial reasons, because I have a lot of ink and very little space. But I do like these Altenew ink cubes if you're thinking about buying them, as well as the Paper Tray ones. Now, the other thing that you'll want to have, here's another Altenew set that I just pulled. Some of the sets, you'll notice this has actually 5 layers, but the one layer here is the outline. And let me bring it closer. This is the outline, and in their example, in their example here, they use black as the outline. You don't have to use that outline stamp if you don't want to. You can just use all the 4 layers and call it done. Or, you know what I mean. You don't have to use that 5th layer to do the outline. Some of them have this, some of them don't. It just depends on the stamp set, really. Because this one didn't have it. It has 4 layers. This one did have it. It has 5 layers. So it's just an option that you might want to think about when you're doing your stamping. It may look better to you without it. It may look better with it. I don't know. It's just up to you. The other tool I use is my stamp positioning tools. Now I have 3 different types. The newest one I bought was the Stamparatus. This does not have the doors on them because the doors that I have, and excuse my magnets, are on the bottom here. The reason I bought this is because you can have 2 doors, 2 lids, one here and one down the side. That gives you 4 different surfaces to do the layering. And I have a lot of layering stamps. I do enjoy it. So that's the reason why I invested in this product. And it's not that expensive. It's less expensive than this one that's been out of the market for a long time. And this doesn't have more than 1 lid. It only has 1. And if you want to set up the layered stamping, you can, as long as you can find the space in your tool to do that. Or you have to take off each one at a time. Or you have to have multiples of these. And I do have 2, so I could still do the layered stamping with it. That's what I did before this product came out. Okay, now the advantage of the Tim Holtz one, my magnets are sticking to the Misty. Sorry. Let me put this over here. The Tim Holtz Tonic stamp platform, it's larger, so it gives you more room to put layers on here. So when I say layers, I mean that when you go to set up your 4 different layers that are in this stamp, let me bring it back. The 4 different layers that are in the stamp, 1, 2, 3, 4, you could have different quadrants set up. You know, one over here in the upper left, if it fits, one over here in the upper left to do the first layer, and then another quadrant right here in the bottom to do the next layer, and then so forth. So you could have all 4 as long as the stamp itself fits in there and you have enough room for your paper to get moved around. So that is another option if you have a larger stamping tool but the tool only has 1 door, to use that larger surface area to cover that. So that's another thing to keep in mind. My preference is the Stamparatus simply because I can just flip the doors and go on to the next. Okay, so let me show you. Let me show you. All right, I'm gonna just share with you some information that I've learned. Here's the 4 doors. My stamp is still on this on the doors because I have 2 Stamparatuses. I have 4 doors, so I can use all 4 of them to do my layering stamps. And just so you know, one side of them has the leaf layers, the reverse side has the petals for the roses. So they're all lined up to be able to stamp, and this will allow you to stamp multiples. So I have actually 3 different card fronts made, actually made 4, stamped out because they were all set up on the Stamparatus, okay, and or you know, whatever your stamping tool is. I just haven't made them into cards yet. So that is the advantage also of using this tool. Now if you don't have one of these, I've seen people use the Stamp-A-Majig. There is certainly more effort to do that, to using that tool. It can be done, but I have never used one of those. I don't even have one of those tools, and I don't think I need to buy another tool just to show you guys how this is done. The other question you might be asking is, can you use a regular stamp block? Well, yes you can, but I don't know that many people who can get a stamp block exactly lined up as it's supposed to be on the next layer and the next layer and the next layer. So with this type of stamping tool, you have time to fiddle around with it. Okay, so that's another thing to think about. If you're not into the layered stamping yet and you're wanting to get into it, I would suggest you buy some sort of stamp positioning tool, like a MISTI or like a Stamparatus or the Tonic platform or whatever brand you want to use. I'm not promoting any particular brand. This is when you are doing your layering. The lighter or the lightest of the colors that you're stamping with is going to be the stamp that has the least amount of detail. So if you look across this set of stamps here that make up this final product, this one right here has the least amount of details, so it is going to have the lightest color, and you're going to go darker with the colors as you stamp. Okay, you don't necessarily have to start with this particular stamp. You can start with this one if you're more inclined to doing it that way. And I have tried it the other direction, not this particular stamp, but with this stamp, I feel more comfortable starting with the stamp that has the most amount of detail. Sorry for the dog. Most amount of detail, darkest color first, and then moving to the one with the least amount of detail, which is this one, and this one would have the lightest color. Because this one shows me where the details are all at, it's easier for me to line up between the two stamps and go from here to here to here. Okay, does that make sense? Actually, I think I did that in reverse. It should be this way. That's just a tip. It's whatever your preference is. I would say you should experiment to whatever you're most comfortable with. So one of the things that I wanted to share with you all was also the arrangement of your stamp on your stamp platform. One of the things that I recognized after I had stamped my whole layered image, including the leaves, was that the placement on my stamp platform of the actual image to the lid was incorrect when I was doing these cards. Because if you look at this image, once you have all of the leaves and flowers layers actually stamped out, you'll notice that the stems of the flowers kind of terminate over here. Well, if this card was intended to be a vertical card, it would look a little strange because, as you can see, the stems go off to the side. Well, you can't really do, I don't think that you would want the image to be like that. So I figured out a way to fix this for the following cards that I did without having to restamp, or sorry, without having to take off all of my stamps that after I had placed them on the lid. So you'll notice that these images, this is one I did later, is slightly off from what this one was, because I figured out how to do this. So in order to do that, to fix it without having to replace all of your images, you could do that. I didn't want to. What I did was I used my corners from Sweet Petunia. Or you can use magnets. It's up to you. But these make it a lot easier because there's a straight edge in a 90-degree angle. So what I did was figured out, after stamping one layer down, or placing it, you know, in the spot that it should be in, right? I tilted the paper. So I had pre-cut my paper to A2 size. And as you can see, this is the original image that was kind of off to the side. It looks better as a horizontal card, as you can see. So I'll be using it this way. I tilted it and then held the paper in place so that the card, once the image is stamped, is now more vertical. So as you can see, I found the correct placement and used my MISTI corners to hold the paper in that place. So I could just take a blank piece of paper cut down to the same size like this, for instance, and just stick that into my little corner jigs here. Obviously the paper has to be the correct size or it won't fit down in there, but that will allow me to stamp all the layers without having to remove the stamps from the platform and having to reposition the whole thing. So I just wanted to share that tip as well. You cannot tell as you're placing these on here what the finished image is going to look like with all the layers outside of looking actually at the back of the packaging, but it's something I didn't pay attention to before. So that's note to self: pay attention to the positioning of your stamps. It's hard to tell when you're just looking at that layer what position they should be in on your stamp platform, because once it's all done, if my paper had been in there like this, which it was originally, this is incorrect, because you end up, if you put the paper in like that, you end up with an image that's like this, and all of the stems go to this corner, which isn't necessarily what you want if you're trying to make a vertical card. I can use this image this way. I don't think that's an issue, but it's kind of something to think about, because sometimes your stamp might be, you know, what if your stamp was like, you know, off to the side or what have you. You don't want that. So that's just a way to kind of correct any mistake you might make with the actual positioning of the stamp on the platform.